A lot of village clergymen wrote diaries, but his was the fullest. Church of England Vicar's diary. It's like Pepys's diary, but a country diary. It's on the same level as Pepys, not perhaps as full, but very, very important diary. And when I was working on witchcraft, I came across this diary.
Does the lady seem to know about the diary?
Yes, she looks after it. I mean, she looks after the copy I edited. It was passed from her to her successors. And it was really partly Josselin who gave me this realization that the English had not changed very much. Because although he believed in witches a little bit perhaps, and God and all sorts of things, on the whole, the mental and emotional world of Ralph Josselin, particularly his family life, was very recognizable. I didn't feel, he was a complete stranger. I'd been taught that, people in the past lived in a different country, as the saying is. But in fact, when I came to study someone very deeply and wrote a book about him, I found he was very much like me. And this was a shock, right? 300 years ago. And quite a lot of the origins of English individualism is based on this surprise at finding that Josselin was so like me. And then I got interested in the parish of which he was the vicar. And we did this deep study, and it was the work on the parish of Earls, Colne, which really gave me the secret idea of the origins of English individualism.
What do you think was the main theme of the diary?
It was really anxiety. It was about how status anxiety, how to climb socially, how to reconcile the demands of Christian theology and God with the demands to make an economic living, to be a farmer. He was very interesting because he was a part-time vicar in a way. I mean, he was a vicar, but he was also a farmer, a family man, the worries with his family, his tragic loss of his little daughter Mary, his awful arguments with his son John, who he disinherited, his relations with his wife, his constant illness, the weather. It was all the worries that we have: family, weather, money, God, just the same. And so it was a diary filled with worry about whether he would be saved or damned, whether he would be successful or a failure. And even as a child, he was dreaming about whether he would become a famous rich person.
He seemed a little ambitious.
Very ambitious, yes. And he didn't really succeed enormously, but he was like many English people. He's climbed a little bit. He went to Cambridge and he did a degree, and he was quite successful.
I think so. What do you think of his conflicts with his son?
Well, again, I suddenly realized that the modern tensions between parents and children, which we sometimes think is a fairly recent problem, was very old. That he had terrible arguments with his son, and it was really because of partly to do with the inheritance system, because none of his children automatically inherited from him. And indeed, he was a very extreme example, because in the end he got in such a terrible argument with his son John that he cut him off. He said, "I'm not going to give you any money, you're on your own." And for a Church of England person to have to go to that extreme. So when I was editing the diary at the same time as my marriage was breaking up, and I was having later on, as usual, conflicts with my children and Sarah's children. And I was often reminded from the arguments we had with Lily's mother and others of the difficulties of parents and children, which is a structural tension in English society. In Chinese society, in Japanese society, the children have to be traditionally very deferential, do whatever their parents say in the Confucian ethic. In England, they argue, and they have to break free, and they often go and live somewhere entirely different, as Josselin's children did. They went all away. So I suddenly realized this highly mobile, conflictual kind of world that I was inhabiting in the later 20th century was the world of 17th century Essex. And that was a shock.